Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we propagate some geraniums from stem cuttings. So let's go. The geraniums that we're going to work with today are also known as zonal or seed or even bedding geraniums. And many people refer to these geraniums as pelargoniums. These type of geraniums are an annual here where I live. And in fact, they're an annual in most zones, except for zones 10 through 11, where they tend to be more perennial. The best time to take your cuttings is either in the spring, if you want your geraniums to bloom during the season, or to take them in the late summer or early fall if you're planning on overwintering your geraniums indoors. Speaking of overwintering geraniums, I made a video on how to overwinter a geranium and then how to take it out of dormancy. I'll make links to both of those videos in the description below. There are a number of reasons why you would want to overwinter your geraniums. First of all, if they're not hardy in your zone and you want to keep them, then you want to bring them inside. And if you do choose to overwinter your geraniums inside, you can either keep them as a houseplant indoors in a sunny location, or you can bring them downstairs in a cool, dark place, maybe in the basement, and you can overwinter them in their own pot, where they're going to stay dormant and they're not going to bloom. They might even lose a lot of their leaves. And then finally, you can overwinter your geraniums in what's called a dormant state, which means there's no dirt on the roots. But today's video is all about how to take a geranium plant and create more geranium plants from it. So that brings me to my next point, which is why would we want to propagate a geranium plant? Other than the fact that you want to create more plants from the mother plant, another reason would be you want to create plants that are identical to that mother plant. If you were to start geraniums from seed that you collected yourself, there's a chance that the plants that get created don't look identical to the mother plant. So taking cuttings from a geranium plant will ensure that you're going to have an identical copy of the plant that you're taking the cuttings from. Another reason why you might want to propagate your geranium plants is if you have a mother plant and it's getting very tall, very leggy, and you're going to be cutting it back anyway, why not take those cuttings and root them and create more plants? So it's a nice way to keep a mother plant in check from being too leggy while also creating baby plants off of it. And then finally, another reason why you would want to propagate plants from cuttings is, as we said earlier, you may want to overwinter your geranium, but you might not want to overwinter a big, huge geranium plant. So another great option is to just take cuttings from that big plant, root them, and then you have smaller plants to manage indoors during the winter months. Now I'm going to share with you what you need in order to propagate your geranium plant with cuttings. You need a nice, healthy adult plant, and you want it to be free of any insects or any disease. And the biggest thing is just make sure that that plant has been watered the day before, because we're going to be cutting from it and you want the plant to not have any stress induced onto it. Next, you want some sort of pot or container where your cuttings are going to be placed into. It can be a round pot, it can be a square pot. What I recommend though is it be a little bit of a larger pot. If you're going to just take one single cutting and you're going to place it into a pot, it can be about 3 inches in size. If you're going to be taking more cuttings and you want to put them all into one single pot, then I recommend that you use a larger pot. Maybe like a 5-inch pot if you're going to put 4 or 5 cuttings in it. And the key is no matter what pot or container you choose to use, you want to make sure it has drainage holes in it. And by the way, if you don't have any pots on hand, you can always use something simple like a clean yogurt cup or even a drinking cup. The next thing you're going to need is something clean and sharp to be able to take your cuttings with. And some ideas would be a razor, an X-Acto knife, a scalpel, or a sharp knife. I did a bunch of research on the type of tool to use for cutting, and a few sites did mention that you could use pruning shears, secateurs, or scissors. However, from my own personal experience, as well as based on the research that I did, I wouldn't recommend using those type of tools because there's a chance you can crush the stem while you're trying to take your cutting. I would use something that's a little bit nice and clean of a cut, something that has kind of like a razor type edge to it. Something else that you will need is a pre-moistened, well-draining potting mix. And what I'm going to be using is my own potting mix that I make, which is 7 parts of peat moss to 2 parts of perlite. The perlite is really key. It's good to have that because perlite's known to help with draining, and you definitely want your water to drain freely. Now, you don't have to make your own potting mix. You can definitely buy your own potting mix. The key is just make sure that it's not going to be compacted, that it's going to be well draining. You also want to use something like a pen or a dibble, something to be able to make a hole into your pot. Because when you're placing the cutting into the pot, you don't want to just force that cutting into the pot. You want to place it gently into a hole that you've already made. The next thing you're going to need is rubbing alcohol. The reason you want rubbing alcohol is you want to be able to sterilize all the things you're going to be using. For example, you want to sterilize your cutting instrument, you want to sterilize your dibble or your pen. You don't want to infect your plant with anything unnecessarily. You want to keep it a nice sterile environment. And also, it's nice to have either a piece of cloth or a cotton ball swab because you're going to need to take that rubbing alcohol and pour it onto something. In my case, I'm planning to use just cotton ball swabs because I had them handy. I know it sounds like a lot of things that you need so far. It's not too many items, and it's so well worth it if you can get free plants out of the process. Now I'm going to share with you a few optional things that you can use. One of them is rooting hormone. And based on my research, I found that geraniums seem to root very easily without rooting hormone. And today, when we start this project, I'm going to be doing an experiment, and I'm going to be doing some cuttings using rooting hormone and some cuttings not using rooting hormone. That's why I'm calling it optional. And then I will be making a video at a later date sharing with you what my results of this experiment is. And so you want to make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And also please hit the notification bell because you don't want to miss out on the results of my experiment. And going along with the rooting hormone would be some sort of a dish or a small container because when you take your cutting, you don't want to be putting the cutting directly into the rooting hormone. So I'll be pouring a little bit of the rooting hormone into a small dish. And then the final optional thing that you can have when doing your cuttings here is a heating mat. It appears from when I did some reading on this topic that the bottom heat helps with the roots being created faster. I'm not sure if that necessarily matters. I'm not in a rush for this plant to create its roots. So again, part of my experiment will be some plants will be put on a heat mat and some plants will not be on the heat mat. Okay, I'm going to take you in for a closer look and we're going to get started with this project. What I have in this bucket is the potting mix that I made myself. It's light and fluffy. It's already been pre-moistened. And when it comes to your potting mix, you want to make sure that when you squeeze it, you don't have water dripping out of it. Otherwise, it's way too wet. But also when you let go, you notice that the potting mix is holding its form. And that's the exact amount of water that you want in your potting mix. I just have these on hand. These are small 3-inch pots, and you can see that they're circular shape. They're brand new, but if they were not brand new, I would have to clean them and sterilize them. And we're going to go ahead and just fill them up with the potting mix. As you're filling up your pot, you want to make sure you press down, but you don't want to press down too hard because you want the roots to be able to form as they're in this pot. So I'm just pressing down very lightly. Let me go ahead and fill up the other pots that I have. My pots have been filled with the potting mix, and I forgot to mention I also had washed my hands before touching the potting mix, and that's important. You want to make sure that your hands are clean as well. Here is some rubbing alcohol that I just had handy at home. What's really nice is it's very affordable. You can buy a bottle of this just for a few dollars, and it's such an important thing to have when it comes to gardening, both indoors as well as outdoors. Here I have a cotton swab, and what I'm going to do is just pour a small amount of the rubbing alcohol onto the cotton swab. And I'm just going to go ahead and rub all sides of the back of this pen with this rubbing alcohol. And what I have here is an X-Acto knife, and that's what I'm going to be using today to make my cuttings. We're going to go ahead and sterilize that as well. What we have here are just some shears, and I'm going to go ahead and disinfect these. When you're working with anything sharp, you just want to be very careful. You don't want to cut yourself. This is the rooting hormone that I'm going to use. I know there are different types of rooting hormone out there, but this is the one I had handy. And it's a powder form. I know there are some liquid ones out there as well. And sometimes I've seen people take their cutting and dip it directly into the rooting hormone, but generally it's better practice not to do that. You don't want to bring any sort of infection into this rooting hormone. So I'm going to pour a small amount into a dish. You don't need a lot. A small amount goes a long way. What's nice about rooting hormone is it just stimulates root growth, and the geranium should root on its own, but this should aid in the development of those roots to happen in a quicker way. When it comes to choosing which stem you're going to be cutting, you want to choose a stem that's nice and green, that's not flowering, and that's not woody or very old. And before we do anything, the first thing I want to do is just go ahead and cut off all of these buds here. A good length for a cutting is about 3 to 4 inches in length. And you always want to take your cutting above a set of leaves or a leaf node. So you can see that there's some leaves here, and that's known as the leaf node. You would want to take cutting above that, or you'd want to take your cutting above this set of leaves down here, or leaf node right there. One of the reasons that geraniums will root so easily and you typically don't need rooting hormone is that there is a very high concentration of natural hormone found within the geranium where you make the cut. So that's just good information to know. And I want to point out that once you make that cut, what will happen over time is before the roots form, the plant will create a callus. It's like little small bumps at the end of this cutting. You might not see them, but I want to let you know about that. And that happens with many cuttings like roses and other plants. When you take cuts like that, before the roots form, the plant will callus over right there. And when it comes to taking your cut, it's usually optimal to take just a straight cut when it comes to geraniums. But if you want to take an angled cut, that is an option. I've read you can do it both ways. I'm going to be trying to just take straight cuts today. So you can see here that this is a nice long cutting. It's big, but not too big. It's on a stem that's nice and green, and this is about 4 inches. There's my leaf node, and I'm going to be cutting just above it. And that's what the bottom of the cutting looks like. So when it comes to a cutting like this, there are a couple of things you want to do. You want to basically snip off any excess leaves, flowers, flower buds, and what are called stipules, which is this right here, this little papery looking thing. And the stipules, you can see, is a tiny triangular secondary leaflet. But you don't want to take everything off. You want to leave about 2 leaves at the very top. So let's go ahead and start taking off some of these bottom leaves. So I have a few leaves left on the top, but this one's quite large. I'm going to go ahead and remove this leaf as well. So I'm leaving 3 leaves here. I could remove this bottom one as well if I wanted to, but I think that's a good amount of leaves to leave on here. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a hole in the center here where I'm going to put my cutting. Again, you don't ever want to just take your cutting and push it down in. It's better to make the hole first. And next, what we're going to do is take the end of our cutting and dip all sides of it into this rooting hormone. I'm going to shake off any excess hormone. And when it comes to placing this into the hole, optimally, you want to have at least one set of leaf nodes here under the soil, but it would be nice if you can get 2 sets. So we're going to aim for these 2 sets to be in the soil here. And I'm going to press down on all sides. And you can see that the leaves are not touching the soil. If that was happening, then you'd want to remove that bottom leaf. But we are in a good place with this cutting. I think it's going to do very well. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to make 3 more cuttings. One of those cuttings will have rooting hormone on it. 2 of the cuttings will not have rooting hormone on them. After I'm done with that, I'll show you what the next steps are. So over here are the 2 mother plants that I took my cuttings off of. Again, these are geraniums that I had overwintered bare root. I'm noticing I have a couple more buds here. I'll make sure I remove those. And what's going to happen with this plant is now it's going to put more energy into creating more leaves. because we've taken from the mom plant up here at the top. So this will end up closing up, but the plant will put more energy into creating leaves down below. And here's the other mother plant that we borrowed from. And you can see we made a cutting up here and a cutting over here. So again, it will start putting energy now into creating more leaves down here as well as up here. So with the cuttings, what I did was I labeled them just for our experiment so I know what's what. And R means there was rooting hormone that was put on here. H means that this cutting will be placed on a heat mat. With this cutting, it means that rooting hormone was applied, but this will not be put on a heat mat. This cutting does not have rooting hormone on it, but it will be placed on a heat mat. I know this cutting looks weird. Anyway, this label is blank, and that means there was no rooting hormone put on, and this will not be placed on a heat mat. Normally, when you're doing cuttings, be it from geraniums or any other plant, you want to take a bunch of them because it's very hard to get 100% success rate. And if I had more geranium plants, then I would be doing more cuttings. But for right now, I don't want to take too much from the mother plants based on the number of plants that I currently have. But my last average frost date is May 15th. So I still have plenty of time. And as my mother plants keep growing, I'm going to continue taking cuttings off of them. But I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to share with you how to take the cuttings and what my process is. And with one of these cuttings that I had taken, what I did with some of the leaves was I cut the leaves in half. That's very important too. When you're doing cuttings from plants, you don't want the leaves to be big and huge. It's not good for the plant to create those roots, and it just helps so that the plant is putting the energy into creating roots and not into the big leaves that are on there. When I was doing my research on propagating geraniums with cuttings, one way of propagating the geraniums is by actually taking a cutting and placing it in a jar of water. And what I found during my research is it can work, it does work, but it doesn't consistently work. That a more consistent method is to do how we did it today. Also, when you place the cuttings in water, there's chance of rot and just the cuttings can become very slimy. You have to keep changing the water out. So it just sounds like it's a lot more work. And at the end of the day, once those cuttings create roots, guess what? You still need to place the cuttings into a pot like this with soil. So I figured I'm going to eliminate that step. But I wanted to share that with you in case you wanted to try it or experiment with cuttings of geraniums in water. What I also found when I was researching this whole process was humidity dome or no humidity dome. I opted for no humidity dome. I found some people do use either a plastic bag, like they would put like a tall, like a straw or a chopstick or something in here and put a plastic bag on this. And then, you could take a rubber band. You're basically making a humidity dome. You're making it a nice, humid environment. And, or like if you had cuttings in a tray and you put a humidity dome on that. But what I found was with geraniums in particular, it's not optimal. It can cause a lot of issues, again, when it comes to like rot. So I opted for no humidity dome. My house is actually pretty humid. I have so many plants started from seed all around me right now. And so I don't need an additionally humid environment for my place. But if you lived in a place where it was very dry and you thought it would benefit your plant, you could experiment with that as well. When it comes to watering these plants, I will be bottom watering them. And you want to make sure that you keep these with a tray under them or a saucer under them. And you don't want to be watering your plant from up above, from the top, because you don't want water to get on the leaves. So if you are going to water from above, just make sure you do it just at the base of the plant. Just don't get any water to splash on the leaves. And then finally, when it comes to when will we see roots, sometimes you can see roots as short as in 1 week. And it can take as long as maybe even 4 weeks. So this will be a good experiment, but I will tell you, I am going to hold back and I'm not going to be checking for the roots. I don't want to hurt the plant. I don't want to disturb it. And I know myself in the past when I've tried rooting different things, I'm so anxious and I want to see, are there roots? And I start tugging, I start pulling. I'm going to wait. And you can know that there are roots in here. You'll see the roots forming in the bottom here. Also, the plant will start growing from the top. It'll be making more leaves. It might even have flower buds forming. Although if I see flower buds forming, I'm going to cut the flower buds off. I want it to put the energy into creating those roots. So I definitely wanted to caution you that don't be so quick to check for the roots. Just let the plant do what it needs to do. And I'm going to be placing these just behind me under my grow lights. You can put them in a sunny location, just don't put them in full sun. It can be a dappled sun, but you want them to be in a nice warm area. And don't worry, I will be sure to give you an update on how this all works out. I hope you found this video helpful. And if you have any questions, as always, drop them down in the comments below. Until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.